Hello, my dearest, lovely, beautiful channel members. I'm just so happy that we can be here again at the end of the year for another Social Stud Live post show. I'm just so touched right here over the whole situation and all the friends we made along the way. And seeing this year come to an end, it's just so heavy on me. It's almost like having an allergy fit, but with emotions. Okay, since we've done enough of that, hi everyone, my name is Brady, you know me. I'm the guy whose channel you've become a member of at some point or another, and this is the Social Stud Live post show. I realized going into the next live stream, I'm recording this on Christmas night. Just programming note there. I'm recording this before I did the live stream, so it's actually going to be ready to go up right after the actual live stream. So this is recorded before any of that stuff has happened. What else? Anything else to say here? Oh yeah, it's Christmas night, and I realized that my playlist for tomorrow doesn't actually have any Christmas material in it. There weren't a lot of Christmas or holiday themed videos that I felt like watching this year, but I ended up finding a couple for the post show so that I can say that, hey, at least I did something seasonal before it all came to an end this year. And here we are. I found a couple extra history videos that are related to the holidays. I thought that would be kind of cool. Extra history is somebody who I checked out more recently for the first time in the grand scheme of things. It's one of the newer things that I've checked out on this channel, so I thought that would be a really cool thing to do this year, because last year I did a whole bunch of Christmas related videos, and this year I didn't really do much of that at all. But last year I didn't have extra history on the lineup. It wasn't an option that I was aware of at the time. Now I know it's a thing, so I was like, hey, do they have any Christmas videos? And then two came up, and we're going to check out both of them today. So first we have 12 popular Christmas myths that are totally false, and what medieval people ate for Christmas. Both of those should be a lot of fun. I've learned a handful of things about Christmas since starting this channel, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to bring some of that knowledge with me today. In reality, I am having an allergy fit. That's why I'm dabbing my eye a little bit. It's just something that I got to deal with today. So I'm hoping I could bring some of that knowledge today, but we'll see. And I'm hoping I learn at least one or two new things. That would be nice. There's so much to Christmas that it would only be natural that something in this list of 12 I still believe and happens to be false. But we'll see. Let's get started.
Admitting that a lot of the things we know about Christmas are wrong doesn't diminish the deep significance the day has for millions of people around the world. Sometimes it's fun to look at the gears inside the magic so we can better appreciate how our belief systems have evolved.
When I first started seeing myself as some sort of a pseudo-intellectual, which I don't really see myself as anymore. Now I'm just feel like I'm just a guy, and I'm not even all that smart. But at a point, I was thinking like, man, I got it figured out, because I was a teenager. And when you're a teenager, you feel like you have it all figured out. I started being a little bit more judgmental about the holiday season as I learned some of the background around it, and I started learning that some of the customs that we hold dear may not necessarily be based on very solid foundation. And I'm not just talking about the Santa Claus thing. I'm talking about probably a good amount of the stuff they are going to be talking about in this video. And I thought that took away from the holiday itself. Now that doesn't really bug me anymore. I think I've really eased up on all that stuff as I've been exposed to more places, and I could kind of figure out how cultural practices come together more generally. I kind of appreciate how a lot of the ideas behind Christmas and other holidays have morphed and changed over time and how they've been impacted by history. I feel like the smartass version of myself from before who thought he knew better, uh, maybe uh, was thinking more simplistically than he could have possibly understood at the time. So, yeah. I find I have a much better appreciation of it now. This is going to be an interesting one. The history of Jesus is always weird.
Jesus' birthday is the reason for the season, so how could that date possibly be wrong? Well, there's no record of the actual birthday in scripture or historical texts. In the 3rd century CE, the Roman scholar Hippolytus came to the conclusion that Jesus was conceived on the spring equinox, which would put Christ's birthday close to the 25th of December. We celebrate Christmas in December because several cultures celebrated the winter solstice on or around the 25th. Converting pagans to Christianity was easier if their holy days were reinvented rather than erased.
That's a practice that goes beyond just Christianity, too. I think that goes all the way back to at least as far back as the Greek gods. A lot of surrounding civilizations, as they are being converted and brought into the Greek mythos, a lot of their gods are added, or they are kind of recognized as part of the existing Greek gods. They would be like, hey, this is Zeus by another name. You believed in Zeus the whole time, so you should listen to what the rest of our religion has to say.
Record, modern scholars believe Jesus was born in late September. Evergreen trees were used in pagan rituals before becoming a symbol of Christmas. It's unclear how trees went from there to the German Protestants in the 16th century. It may have been inspired by Martin Luther looking up at the stars, or a combination of two pre-existing German traditions, the Paradise Tree and the Christmas light. In 1846, a sketch of Queen Victoria and her German husband, Prince Albert, appeared for the Illustrated London News. The royals stood in front of an evergreen Christmas tree, and that sketch started the trend.
I mean, the trend of copying people and copying royals, copying nobles, that is not at all surprising that was a thing. I didn't know about that one. That's actually really interesting, and I thought it went back a little further than Victoria, and in a sense it would have, with some of the other things that it potentially could have been inspired by, but yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that one.
Considering the popularity of the holiday, many people assume that Christmas is the most important day in the Christian faith. That distinction actually goes to Easter. Believers celebrated Easter almost immediately. Christmas was added to the calendar hundreds of years later.
Well, that was simple enough.
The current belief that there's a secular war against Christmas isn't really that new of an idea. Back in 1959, the ultra-conservative...
I don't know when this video is from, but the war on Christmas has been an issue for a long time. And by issue, I mean it's been kind of a made-up issue for a really long time. The American culture war is such bullcrap. We're fighting over things that aren't actually issues. I believe more people celebrate Christmas than there are actual Christians in the United States. You might have to check my math on the numbers there, but I'm pretty sure that more people celebrate the holiday than there are people who actually participate in the religion itself, which one could say maybe that waters down the holiday. Maybe that's a thing, but it's not like people are holding Christmas as a broad celebration back. You could argue that maybe it's lost its purity, but I could also argue that it never really had that kind of purity. It's always been kind of a belligerent holiday in a lot of ways.
St. John Birch Society believed that Jews were launching a war on Christianity. Part of their defense strategy was the publication of a pamphlet titled There Goes Christmas, which proved how communists were working with the UN to kill the holiday. In reality, few modern retailers actually avoid the word Christmas.
This came from a bunch of snowflakes who were offended by the words happy holidays. Oh, did that hurt your feelings? And it comes from a very conservative crowd that is usually not the one that's very proud to say, what you're saying hurts my fifis. It's not something I would typically mock somebody for. It just often comes off as very it's like balancing the outrage machine with like this idea of people being able to do whatever they want and it not really adding up in a way that really makes a whole lot of sense. I don't know. The war on Christmas is just dumb. They got mad over Starbucks cups that already looked pretty Christmassy. They just weren't Christmassy enough. Look up that story. War on Christmas Starbucks. Oh my God, it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Writing Christmas
That's a lie.
as Xmas was not meant to be derogatory to Christians. The term has deep roots in the faith. It wasn't non-Christians, but Christians who started the practice. It began with the writers of the New Testament. The second half of the Bible was written in Koine Greek, where the first letter in Christ's name is X. To save room on the page, his name was frequently shortened to the single letter.
That's actually really cool. I didn't know about that
Puff
one.
Daddy, a.k.a. P. Diddy, a.k.a. Brother Love, Santa Claus
Brother
in red
Love.
hasn't always gone by Santa, Saint Nick, or Kris Kringle. It all started with Nicholas, the 4th century Turkish bishop, who devoted himself to helping the poor with such acts as hiding money in people's stockings as they slept. After his death, he was sainted, St. Nicholas or St. Nick. Father Christmas started in England as an embodiment of the winter solstice. He stopped being a symbol of drinking and revelry and became a gift giver in the Victorian era. The Dutch called
But that's an element that never really leaves Christmas. Drinking and revelry. And if it was a truly religious holiday, you'd think that wouldn't really be as much of, as big of an element. But I think that has always manifested in some way or another. When the Puritans were anti-Christmas, it was often because, and the Puritans were anti-Christmas because there's no actual grounding in the Bible, and it was often a holiday dedicated to belligerence, drinking, and just generally being a bunch of bastards, a bunch of rabble rousers. It's a lot of people from the lower class would end up really causing a lot of trouble for the nice, clean, upper class people. It was in a lot of ways a time when the ideas of class were theoretically flipped on their heads, and it was the poor's turn to finally ask something of the rich, and then things would go back to normal, and the social structure would go back to where it was when the season was over.
St. Nicholas Sinterklaas, which was translated into Santa Claus. When Santa made his way to the UK in the 1850s, he and Father Christmas became synonymous. German and Dutch settlers in Pennsylvania folded the German gift-giving Christkind, whom they called Kris Kringle, into the idea of Santa Claus. He eventually became Kris Kringle in part because a kringle was a popular Dutch holiday pastry of the day.
That makes sense. It sounds like a pastry. So.
In the 6th century, when Dionysius Exiguus reworked the Julian calendar, he came up with the idea of dividing the timeline into pre-Jesus and post-Jesus. But at that time, 0 wasn't a concept that had reached Western civilization. That wouldn't happen until around the 12th century. As far as the person who created BC and AD was concerned, not only was there no year 0, there was no number 0. So when was Christ actually born? Extrapolating from biblical references and historical documents, scholars would place his birth between 6 and 2 BC.
Okay, that's fair.
Everyone knows about the...
Not a whole lot to comment on there. Okay, he might have been... And a younger version of me would have been like, he wasn't even born there. Why do you even do stuff like that? I've got a lot of beef with a younger version of myself today. I thought I was so smart. I think the dumber I start to realize I am, the smarter I end up being able to put myself forward as. Because I know what I don't know. Back then, I didn't know what I didn't know. I thought I knew more than I knew.
Royal Eastern
This is like a nice little subplot for this Christmas video, isn't it? A certain level of self-loathing I have.
kings who visited baby Jesus in the manger: Gaspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. Unfortunately, even according to the Bible, they weren't kings. The Gospels tell us they were magi, also referred to as wise men. What's more, they visited
Magi.
Jesus and his mom while he was a child, not as an infant. Even
I don't know what exactly magi are in real life, what you consider them to be. I know that I watched an anime, and it's a weird conversation to have, but maybe there's some inspiration there. A magi in the anime, uh, well, I think it was pronounced a magi, but I think it's supposed to be the same thing. The anime or manga, I believe it was pronounced magi. But the premise was that the Magi were kind of king makers rather than kings themselves. They would be the ones who kind of anoint and guide kings. I don't know if there's like any sort of real world comparison to be made there, but I wouldn't be surprised if the inspiration was there.
the names we call them are wrong. Those were just popular monikers added to the legend in Italy in the 6th century. Christmas tree fires are such a big problem that city fire departments regularly demonstrate the risk to the public. That is, if you consider roughly 230 fires per year out of millions of trees to be a big risk. What actually is a concern is that Christmas tree fires tend to be more deadly. 1 in 18 tree fires results in a death, while only 1 in 134 regular home fires proves fatal. But trees are a safety risk. Over 5,800 people go to the ER each year from accidents resulting from decorating Christmas trees.
That's not surprising in the slightest.
The legend that Christmas was once banned in America is true, but not the way you would think. In 1659, Puritans banned Christmas in Massachusetts.
Puritans.
They did it in an attempt to distance themselves from the practices of the Church of England. The ban lasted for 22 years. In fact, it wasn't until the 1800s that Boston really jumped onto the Christmas bandwagon.
And you know, they were not necessarily wrong from a biblical standpoint. There's no grounding for Christmas in the Bible by any means. And if there are people who are trying to distance themselves from kind of the revelry and some of the arbitrariness and some of the just added pieces to Christianity that were kind of normalized often by the Catholic Church, you might want to pull back on a lot of these celebrations that don't really have biblical grounding. So, as far as they go, I totally understand why the Puritans would not necessarily be pro-Christmas. I don't think anybody could necessarily blame them from at least a religious standpoint. People usually give the Puritans crap because they generally had sticks up their behind and were pretty much no fun. In a lot of ways, that was true. I mean, they could cut loose every once in a while, but I think some of that reputation is earned. And I think this is one of those places where that reputation comes from. An element of it might come from stuff like this.
The rumor that the White House no longer has a Christmas tree is false.
Shut up, Bill.
It wasn't true when the rumor was started during the Obama administration in 2009, and it isn't true now. Some confusion arose from the fact that the Capitol Christmas tree
They really wanted to convince everybody that Obama hated America and Christianity and all that. I don't understand, some of the scandals during the Obama years, the guy conducted, a really evil drone war. He killed so many innocent civilians, and they just wanted to be like, no, he's a Muslim, and he hates America and Christian values, and holiday tree, it's a Christmas tree! And I'm just sitting here like, what about all those innocent people he's bombing overseas? Like, and he's getting like a really, really high number of civilian casualties. Why is nobody talking about that? We don't want to talk about that? Fine. Okay. Whatever. Let's talk about a freaking tree. That's how I felt at the time, and I was a much younger person at the time, and like that's one thing I had together. I knew that was BS, that we were talking about that and not the drone war.
Program focuses on the beauty of the states represented
I still think
by
I was
the
right
ornaments,
back then.
rather than on anything religious or political. But that isn't the tree that goes up in the White House. That impressive specimen is very proudly called a Christmas tree. The Coca-Cola company has used the image of Santa Claus so effectively in their holiday ad campaigns that many people think that they created the jolly old fellow. In an effort to increase sales during the Depression, Coke began showing Santa drinking an icy cold Coke instead of a glass of milk during a time of the year that few people associate with frosty beverages. The Coca-Cola-centric depiction didn't find its way into the public until 1931, over a century after Santa donned his red suit. Thank you for joining.
Like, as they talked about in this video, the Santa Claus has so many little inspirations that it pulls from. There's like an incredible amount of mythology from many different civilizations that came together and created the Santa Claus that we have today. I suppose you can give Coca-Cola credit for further popularizing this particular image of Santa. I don't think that's doubtful. They certainly contributed to this popular image of Santa in a big way in advertising. There's something very very American about how this image of Santa came to the American public and beyond through marketing. But they didn't just make Santa out of thin air. I think we all kind of understood that that's not necessarily the thing, but we all know that advertising has a very strong grip on culture in the United States and in a globalized world beyond the United States. All right, that was cool. Let's see the next
Happy
one.
holidays
I believe
and
the next
Merry
one
Xmas.
we got.
If you like this video, subscribe to our channel. We're Weird History.
Iranian. Ooh, that's some deep stuff.
It may come
We're
as
gonna
no
do
surprise.
medieval people and what they ate for Christmas dinner. That's an interesting one. Since I'm recording this Christmas night, I know what I ate for dinner. It wasn't a particularly a Christmassy dinner, but I'm curious about how this might differ from my experiences. I know people in all different places, even different places in the United States, and appreciate Christmas dinner in different ways and have different normal dishes. And this isn't even going to include the would-be United States. This is medieval people, so this is going to be broadly European, it seems. So that should be interesting. So let's see what they got for you and me. Sorry, some of that Christmas dinner is coming up.
That medieval Europeans had grand Christmas celebrations. Medieval Christmas feasts, however, were more than just another meal. They were opportunities to cook the most elaborate medieval foods with the most lavish and exotic ingredients.
That's going to be interesting, and there's likely going to be a divide between upper and lower classes here, unless we're mostly focusing on the extravagant meals, which would be very upper class centric. In the United States, or would-be United States, I read a lot about the early Christmas celebrations, and it was one of the few times a year where a lot of people were able to eat fresh meat. So that was a really big part of the season, because the meat would be salted and stored over long periods of time, and it would never quite be as good as it is during this time. So people start gorging themselves on meat and alcohol. So I'm curious if there might be an element of that to explain why this particular time of year is such a time for feasting. I'm sure there's some similar elements there. But like I said, upper and lower classes, we're going to have to see what's different.
So, today we're going to take a look at what people in the medieval era ate during Christmas feasts. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, we'd be much obliged if you would leave a comment and let us know what other holiday topics you would like to hear about. Okay, he brought everything back, all the food for the feast, and he himself, the Grinch, carved the roast beast.
The roast beast. Oh, boar's
In the modern
head.
era, the name boar's head is widely associated with deli meats. But in the
Yeah.
medieval era, they were very literal, and if someone mentioned boar's head, they were talking about the head of a boar. Boar's head was one of the most common foods.
I find that in my experience, I've not really had a lot of food that is designed to look like the living creature. Often, by the time the food gets to my plate, it's so distant visually from the animal that it comes from that it's just hard to relate them. I guess I don't know. Having an actual head on the table, that feels like such an archaic thing, but I'm sure it's still a thing in a lot of places. To me, it
Associated
feels
with
archaic.
Yuletide festivities. The folk tradition was passed down from ancient
Oh, they're
Germanic
so cute,
origins
too.
and continued into Christian celebration through Anglo-Saxon culture. The delicacy was so closely associated with Christmas festivities that a well-known song was put into written history around 1500 called the Boar's Head Carol. The first stanza reads, "I bring back the boar's head, singing praises to the Lord. The boar's head in hands I bring, with garland gay and birds singing. I pray you all help me to sing who are at this banquet." Okay, it's not quite Frosty the Snowman, but it's not terrible either. In medieval times,
they got no bars.
Christmas feast just wasn't a Christmas feast without a boar's head. That being said, not everyone could afford a wild boar. As an alternative, medieval people sometimes baked a cake in the shape of a boar's head to make
Aw,
the
that's
table
cute.
festive. For those with the wealth to serve the real thing, a 16th century German cookbook recommended boiling a wild boar's head and then basting it with wine and serving it with a black sauce made from fat, wheat flour, wine, and cherry syrup. To add more flavor to the sauce, cooks could add sugar, ginger, pepper, cloves, and cinnamon. And to add more texture, they could mix in chopped grapes, raisins, and almonds.
Okay, peacock. That is strange to me. Well, when I think of birds on Christmas, I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody serve chicken at any meal. I wouldn't be surprised, though I get my turkey fix in at Thanksgiving. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I'm sure there are people who do like duck or goose for Christmas. We don't in my family, but I'm sure that's a thing. So I guess peacock's not that absurd. I don't see a lot of peacocks where I come from. So just in general, it seems like such an exotic creature. So it's hard for me to imagine it in any tangible capacity, let alone on my dinner table.
Christmas was one of the most important feasting days on the medieval calendar. Those with the means often showed off elaborate dishes like a roast peacock that was usually served redressed in its own feathers. Ooh,
Oh, that's gross.
You're so fancy and tasty, Mr. Peacock.
They had no qualms about the food they ate looking just like it did when it was alive. They have no beef with that at all.
Mmm. Yes, medieval cooks would skin and roast the whole peacock and then cover it in its own feathers in order to recreate the look of a live bird. The peacock dish was a big deal, and the lady with the highest title had the honor of carrying it out to the table.
This is
Roast
definitely
peacock
an
was
upper
often
class
served
thing.
with sauce. One 15th century Italian cookbook, for example, offered the following recipe for peacock sauce. Mix ginger, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and pepper. Add to them wine and sprinkle in a little sugar. Add some of the peacock's drippings to the sauce and serve. Roasted peacock, however,
That
did
sounds
have its
fine.
problems. Depending on the age and diet of the peacock, the flavor and texture could be off-putting. As a substitute for poor quality peacocks, cooks often took the skin of the bird, but replaced the bird's meat with goose, sewing better quality meat within a more exotic fowl. Sounds like a medieval turducken.
As far as turducken goes, did we do that? Is that our fault? Like, is that Americans? because I don't know where I'll look it up after this, but probably. But the turducken, it feels like something so extra that Americans would do, but for some reason I feel like maybe this one's not on us. I don't know. The turducken feel it's just one of those things that screams American extraness when it comes to food.
In the medieval era, Christmas celebrations often stretched on for days. As a result, Christmas traditions blended with surrounding saint days, such as St. Lucia's Day.
Looks like the lady's about to, like, I think that's a lady beating up a young man or child, or maybe that's an old person. Why are they fighting? Are they fighting? What's happening here? It looks like a snowball fight's happening, but it looks like we got a brawl right in the middle.
Christmas traditions blended with surrounding saint days, such as St. Lucia's Day. St. Lucia, aka Lucia of Syracuse, was a...
Okay, sorry, I know I keep interrupting. I'll let this next part play out. But there's something about the art style where everybody looked the same when they were in, like, this particular style. Like, I thought that was Jesus for a second, but this clearly seems like it's supposed to be a woman. But it wouldn't take many adjustments to make that Jesus. At least most depictions of Jesus
martyr, Lucia's Day. St. Lucia, aka Lucia of Syracuse, was a Christian martyr who lived from 283 to 304 and was famous for allegedly having her eyes gouged out before being killed by a sword to the throat. That's a rough way to get fame. What was a crime, you ask? Well, she wanted to give some portion of her family's riches to the poor. Yeah. Bah humbug to
That's
you.
total
communist. The traditional
communist
feast
stuff.
in her honor was observed by Western Christians on December 13th, when people often celebrated with St. Lucia buns. A modern recipe for St. Lucia buns calls for saffron in the dough. After forming the dough and kneading it, press raisins into the dough to represent the martyr St. Lucia's gouged eyes. Nothing says eat me like gouged eye bread. Moist.
Dude, that's pretty fricked
King
up.
Richard of England, famously known as Richard the Lionheart, served his Christmas guests mincemeat.
That is one thing that I've always been thrown off by whenever I learn about European Christmas practices. So many of them are so morbid compared to a lot of American ones. But, you know, America's a young place. Our history it can be morbid as well, but we often kind of just, you know, ignore that as much as we can. Even when we shouldn't ignore it and we need to acknowledge our history, we're just like, yeah. But this is not shine. It also still is during the medieval period. So I don't know. I don't know how popular these snackies are today.
Pies. At the time, they were known as Christmas pies, which, to be honest, sounds much more like a marketable product name than mincemeat pie. The association between mincemeat pies and Christmas dates back to the Crusades, when Crusaders returned with exotic Eastern spices like ginger, cloves, and nutmeg, supposedly used to represent the gifts of the Magi. Cooks used the spices to season meats left over from the winter slaughter, and then added fruits and other spices before baking the mixture in a pastry shaped like a manger. The pie was topped with a pastry baby Jesus to represent his birth. Mincemeat lovers tried to eat a mincemeat pie for each of the 12 days of Christmas, but they were not allowed to cut the pies with a knife, as it was thought to be unlucky, since they would be cutting through the crib of baby Jesus. The tradition of mincemeat pies for Christmas continues to this day.
I know
but the
this
pies
is
have since stopped resembling the
I knew
biblical
about this.
manger, which is probably for the best, because now I can use a knife.
Christmas eel. Ooh, eel is an interesting thing. I've only had eel in sushi, but I'm down to try it in a lot of different ways. There's just not a lot of places that are accessible and cheap for a poor person like me to afford eel. So it's not something I get to have very often, but this actually sounds interesting already.
Along with other fish was a popular Christmas dish, but Europeans prepared eel differently depending on the region. In Sweden, eel was served in a mustard sauce or smoked. Southern Europeans sometimes cooked eel in wine or almond milk. Medieval Germans simmered eel in wine and added saffron and ginger. One Venetian recipe called for the cook to slowly cook borlotti beans for 1.5 hours. The recipe then says to add butter, an onion, celery, and a carrot before finally placing garlic and eel into the stew, bringing it to a boil.
Eels are weird.
So yeah, there were lots of options for cooking it, but the bottom line is Europeans love that eel meal.
Eel's good. It's yummy.
Gingerbread's association with Christmas has been around since the Middle Ages. One 15th century English recipe starts with a quart of honey, boiled and skimmed. The chef would then mix in saffron and pepper. Next, they would add grated bread and some cinnamon and shape the mixture into a square. Another common technique bakers used for gingerbread was to use molds or stamps. These wooden molds were designed to allow bakers to shape their food, similar to how people created gingerbread men today.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Many
Pottage.
households in the medieval era featured pottage
like
on
a
their
stew,
Christmas
right?
table. It was an encompassing word for any food cooked in a pot. Appropriately enough, it was often a stew. Thus,
Yeah,
pottage could
I
feature
thought
a
so.
plethora of different meats, vegetables, or fruits. For example, one recipe for Christmas pottage started by boiling a leg of beef and then adding red wine, beer, and spices like clove and nutmeg to give the pottage its Christmassy flavor. Next, the cook would add boiled apples, currants, raisins, and prunes. After some time, the beef could be removed and eaten separately from the rest of the pottage. Another type of pottage, called porree, was a particular favorite. Made from boiled leeks, porree probably most closely resembled what we would call today leek soup. Figgy pudding, prominently
pudding.
mentioned in the traditional carol "We Wish You a Merry Christmas," was a kind of thickened medieval porridge. Unlike
The figgy pudding portion of the "Wish You a Merry Christmas" song is really interesting because I think it symbolizes something that I talked about earlier, kind of the flipping of classes, and it's kind of an opportunity for the poor, the peasants, or whatever, to ask something or demand something in a lot of cases of the wealthy, and I think that is demonstrated pretty well in that song. There's a point where it's like, I wish you a Merry Christmas, I wish you a Merry Christmas. But then it gets to a part where they're like, give us some figgy pudding. Give us some figgy pudding. We won't stop until we get some. We won't stop until we get some. And honestly, it kind of has an aggressive air to it. But I think it does symbolize a certain rowdiness that you would get during the time. Well, now it seems like a very innocent song. You can kind of see where some of it comes from and how it may sound a little bit more threatening in another context.
Like modern figgy puddings, medieval figgy pudding resembled a stew rather than a solid dish. A recipe in a 14th century English cookbook instructed cooks to start by blanching almonds and grinding them up. After adding wine and water, the cook needed to add quartered figs, raisins, ginger, and honey before boiling it down until it became thick. Instead of eggnog, medieval Europeans drank posset at Christmas. This thick alcoholic beverage included egg,
very thick.
cream,
That's like a
and
pudding.
beer or wine, which was then thickened with bread, oatmeal, or almond paste. One 17th century recipe recommended boiling a quart of cream with whole spice. While boiling the cream, beat 16 eggs and mix them with hot white wine. Stir the eggs and wine into the cream and let it sit for at least 30 minutes over low heat. The cream will curdle into a consistency like cheese. A thinner neighbor of posset, known as syllabub, might also find its place at the Christmas table.
Syllabub. That's interesting. Sugar plums.
Sugar plums were a seasonal favorite for 16th century cooks and a common accoutrement on any medieval spice
They
plate.
lasted a while,
According
didn't
to
they?
John
That was like one
Gerard,
of the things
a
about them.
16th century herbalist and author, fresh plums contained little nutritional value. However, drying plums transformed them into a more wholesome dish. Plus, preserving the plums made them last longer. A 16th century method for making sugar plums starts with boiling plums in clarified sugar and leaving them dipped in sugar for 3 days. After removing the fruit, boil the syrup with more sugar. Add back in the fruit and let it simmer. Place the plums on a drying rack and then turn them every other day. Once dry, the sugar plums could last all year. And during
Last
the
all
Christmas
year.
season,
There we go. That's something that I heard about. I don't know if that's something I heard about because I know people who watch this person. I don't remember what the context was, but I remember that it was a very efficient thing to have. It was a nice snack to have because it lasted a while. So that's cool.
visions of them can dance in children's heads while they
And anything that
nestle
lasts a
snug in their
while
beds.
is lovely.
Many Christmas recipes call for beer because, hey, it's Christmas. But in addition to
I don't even drink. I'm just playing a role at this point. This is one of those things. It's ever present, regardless of the culture. You get drunk on Christmas, yo. It's tradition. If you don't do it, do you even care about tradition? Do you?
to cooking with beer, a Christmas feast might feature tankards of ale. 'Tis the season to be merry. Medieval ale production was ubiquitous. It wasn't mass-produced since ale couldn't be preserved for long, so most households made their own. Unlike today's beer, medieval ale didn't contain hops. It was often watery and made from grain, water, and yeast, but it was beloved by Europeans of all classes. A medieval recipe for ale calls for over 4 pounds of malt, 1.5 pounds of rolled oats, and 13 quarts of water. After boiling the water, crush the malt. And
some people drank more beer than they would drink water back then. I suppose that's not necessarily exclusive to back then. I'm sure there are plenty of people who have the same troubling issue where they might drink more beer than they drink just plain water.
mix it with the oats. Mix the boiling water and the malty oats, adding the water slowly to let the mixture stand. This process takes several hours.
Sometimes drinking beer was more hygienic. That is a thing, because water could be more easily contaminated than their beer. So I guess there was a practical element to it sometimes.
After removing the wort, mix in 2 packages of ale yeast. It takes several days to ferment the ale.
Stuffed
Christmas
goose.
was the day to feature fancy meats.
Only we're at
Even poorer
a normal
families might
bird.
slaughter a goose for Christmas dinner, or if lucky,
Not a
Scrooge might
peacock.
send them one after being visited by 3 ghosts. Okay, that wasn't the medieval era, but come on, it's a good reference. Moving along, one recipe for stuffed goose dates at least to the 14th century. The recipe required the cook to stuff the goose with sage, parsley, quinces, pears, garlic, and
Quinces?
grapes, and
I don't
roast
know
it.
what that is.
After it had finished roasting, the
Looked like
cooks
an apple.
dressed and served the stuffed goose with a sauce made from grease, wine, and sweet spices.
And
Spiced wines
wine.
went by many names: Hippocras, Piment, and mulled wine. However, one of the most common types of wine in medieval Europe was claret, though it wasn't the
Claret.
high-quality Bordeaux wine we associate the word with today. Spiced wines usually ended most medieval feasts, including Christmas. Most were often very simple to make, consisting of wine, some kind of sweetener, which was generally honey, and, true to its name, spices. So what do
Alrighty.
you think? Do any of these foods sound good to you? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.
There's so many videos from them about different diets from different people. So I might go down that rabbit hole at some point in the future. I thought this one was especially fun given the time that we are in, and now I can say I've done something Christmas related. So I hope you guys enjoyed the live stream. I hope you've enjoyed the post show. If you have anything you want me to check out in next week's live stream or post show, let me know. You've got the comments to yourself as a channel member. There's not many people who are going to be commenting there. It's a very quiet comment section for these things. So I will see it if there is anything down there. There's not too much to sift through. I had a lot of fun here. I had a lot of fun this year. Pretty soon I'm probably going to have to put out some sort of an update video about the memberships, but it won't really have anything new to you guys. More just for like the general audience of the channel that may not be aware of a lot of the stuff I've been putting out as part of the channel membership. So I'm going to probably be highlighting that stuff in the near future. If you what I was thinking. Oh, if you were wondering where like the first episode of the Red Dead Redemption stuff is coming, I said I was going to be starting the Red Dead Redemption playthrough. I will be doing that pretty soon. I was waiting until after I finished my my class this semester to start another game series, so I'm going to be starting that very soon, now that I've wrapped that up and hopefully have done well. Fingers crossed. We'll see how that goes. So thank you very much. I hope you had a very happy season, and I hope next year ends up being better than this one was. Because I know it's been a tough year for a lot of people. A tough couple years, I suppose. Um, so thank you, and I'll see you guys next time with more stuff like this. All right.